My name is Ianto Ware. I'm an actual doctor. I have a PhD in cultural studies. What I'm talking about here is partly that I was involved in setting up an organisation called Format, which some of you may have encountered, and also an organisation called Renew Adelaide, which has just joined with a sister project in Townsville and its parent project in Newcastle, and received funding from the Australian Centre for Social Innovation to develop a national model, which we're incredibly pleased about because now I actually get paid a bit to do this rather than just doing it for free. Both of those things are essentially about setting up infrastructure for what, when we're starting it, we referred to as participatory culture. You might also call it subculture, user-generated culture, grassroots culture, which is what I've got written on my little badge here. Any form of cultural activity that sort of works on the idea that the cultural producer and the consumer are sort of in the same bracket, so horizontally structured culture, rather than the more traditional model if you've got your mass media or your fine arts and they produce culture like a pyramid that filters down. When we began doing this, let's see if this works. Oh, excellent. My friend Joel Catchlove and I were looking at ways that you develop infrastructure specifically built around the idea that you want people to interact like this and not like this. So to begin with the one that's funded, Renew Adelaide is about reactivating urban hubs by housing pretty much cultural entrepreneurs, social entrepreneurs, people with good ideas and no money in empty and disused buildings. So we take a space that looks like that, which is at 153 Hindley Street, being held for redevelopment, has been held for redevelopment for many, many years. There are a lot of buildings like this out there. And we use a thing called a license to access agreement on a 30-day basis. We find someone with a good idea. The access agreement goes around all the issues to do with leases and tax write-offs that landlords love. We find someone with a good idea and they turn it into a space that looks like that. This is the same space as run by Becky Love called the Reading Room at 153 Hindley Street. It's a kind of multi-purpose space, which is one of the major things we always seem to end up working with. So she runs it as a sort of living room, as a tea room, as a place where there's galleries, where she has people playing Scrabble, she has film nights in there, does a whole bunch of things in there to just reactivate that space, get people back in there without saying, you're only here to drink, you're only here to buy stuff, or you're only here to be part of the audience. Let's see, okay. Now, the idea for that came from setting up an organisation that eventually became known as the Format Collective. Format started when Joel Catchlove and I, in 2004 or so, wanted to set up a system, set up infrastructure that got the other people out there who we didn't necessarily know yet, but we knew they were out there, who had the idea that culture is something you do and not just something you sit around and watch. So we're interested in this notion of participatory culture. Basically because we came out of sort of subcultural indie punk scenes where you had that idea of grassroots culture has some validity. That was really the only criteria. We wanted to find a space, a physical space, and get people with that attitude to culture in one place at one time and see what would happen. Now, that worked a lot better than we thought it would. Partly we got a lot more people who did think there was a validity to culture at a horizontal level and were engaged in producing culture at that level. They didn't necessarily want to go and sit and be part of the audience of an opera, they wanted to actually do stuff. We also found that not only did we get more people than we thought we would, we got a much, much wider array of people doing lots and lots of things that most of the time we really didn't understand. So to begin with, we got things we sort of did understand. So we got, this is a panel on activism, writing and publishing that we ran in 2009. And this is sort of our background, so we kind of understood what this was about. You look at the people in there, and there's two people in there that met their funding partner through this event and run a sort of experimental design company called Breakdown Press. There's a guy who influenced us in setting up Format called Luke Sinclair, who runs Sticky in Melbourne, which is like a small kind of indie retail outlet for independent publication. And there's also Lisa Dempster, who went on to run the Emerging Writers Festival and just got back from Dubai running something on publishing and international publishing that no one really understands. We roughly understood what these people are about. This guy, not so much. This is a kid called Matthew Lorenzon, who ran a workshop on how to develop photos with coffee and water. Now, he actually went on to do, he's currently doing his master's in something to do with music and cultural theory and maths that nobody fully understands at Melbourne University. You'll also notice in there Simon Loeffler, who I think was speaking earlier today, is apparently my mortal enemy. He was not only involved in setting up Format, was involved in setting up Hackerspace in South Australia. He's done, aside from the fact he's been involved in events like this, he's also a designer. He's done a whole stream of, he set up the Street Dreams Festival, so there's a whole bunch of other events. And then we also got stuff like this. which was a bunch of people who formed the John Farnham Dance Collective and did a free-form dance routine from top of Rundle Street down Rundle Street, Rundle Mall, Hindley Street, and into this space where we were running our independent press fair, and just did free-form dance. This guy, you actually saw him before in the Restless Dance Theatre production, Lachlan Tetlow Stewart. He's just on an event as part of Next Wave that he debuted at format called Short Message Service, which is sort of about mobile phones and audience agency. So when Joel and I set these things up, we basically just got a space, said, okay, who out there wants to do something? You don't have to identify as a young artist, you don't have to identify as a designer or a theatre person, just come along and do stuff. And we got all these people who did all this stuff that quite frequently made no sense. And we thought this was actually really important because you got all these people and they started talking to each other and their ideas formed with other ideas that they had no other chance to encounter, and they went off and did amazing stuff. And you can see all these pictures. These people have progressed and done more and more stuff that still doesn't make sense. But we thought, we're living in this sort of post-globalised, post-economic rationalist, post-information-rich world. The innovations that we're seeing, we don't know what they are. All we do is get those people, put them together, let them figure it out. So when we started, we kept getting told that we were young artists. Now we'd probably be being told that we're social innovators. This is the people who are figuring out new ideas, getting together, talking about them, and trying to make them work. We thought this was politically important because if we didn't find a space where this happened, everyone kind of ended up sitting at home, eating junk food, watching TV. This picture looks remarkably like what I looked like when I was about 15. Joel and I had both grown up in this sort of world where there really was no space for us to interact, and we would just kind of stay at home and get bored and eat junk food and have culture pushed down upon us. And we thought it was really important we find a way of changing that, and it really seemed to come down to how do we get together and produce culture as a dialogue. So even though we've been constantly told that we're young artists, what we were really influenced by wasn't just art. There was three big things. One of them was growing up in the suburbs. One of them, surprisingly, was the internet, which I think I first got the internet at home when I was about 15, 16. And the third one is globalisation. All of these kind of get confused. People tend to overlook just how incredibly important they've been. So if you think about suburbs to begin with, the reason suburbs we thought were politically important is the suburb is an environment in which there really is no public space. You go from the private space of your house to the private space of your car to the private space of your work, and the only thing you have that's close to public space is heavily moderated retail environments. This looks a lot like where I grew up in Underdale. There is no chance for you to engage with other people in those environments, especially when you're 15. So the ideas that we were seeing at Format cannot happen in this environment. There's no way that kind of basic, small-scale interactions happen and ideas sort of spark and people get moving. Now, when I was 15, 16, same with Joel, the internet came along. And it was amazing. Sans the moustache, this is pretty much what I looked like in 1995. The thing about the internet is that it's basically a replacement for the social space that the suburbs have killed. It's a way of maintaining social networks, a way of maintaining those sort of rudimentary, we know each other kind of links. Unfortunately, are there any cultural studies academics here other than me? For some reason, cultural studies academics who advise on youth policy think the internet is a wacky youth literature. And there's this whole thing about, young people, they really like reading Hamlet in Twitter, which I've never actually seen amongst young people. The other thing that they like to believe is that the internet has completely replaced public space, and we're all living on virtual worlds, and we're appropriating our identities by making these weird avatars, which is total nonsense. If you go and look at your Facebook friends list, pretty sure you'll probably find the vast majority of people on that friends list are people you meet and talk to on a regular basis. Facebook succeeded essentially because it's taken the marketplaces, the town squares, the street corners that 50 to 100 years of urban planning has killed and found a way of replicating what they do. So those passing interactions that you would have usually in a marketplace or a street corner where it's like, you don't just have a big meaningful conversation, but it's like, we know each other. So if you do have a big idea, you've got someone to talk to it about and get off the ground. That's what the internet has replaced. That doesn't always look as glorious as people appropriating their identities by making wacky avatars. Sometimes it looks like this, which is a picture a friend of mine sent me at midnight on a Tuesday night to say, look, I bought a new Motorhead t-shirt and look how good I look in it. Now, this doesn't look glorious, but it's that basic thing of we know each other, we're friends. We keep in contact. We're not going to meet on a street corner, but you know I'm around, I know you're around, you know how well I wear this shirt. the other thing that impacted upon us was globalisation, which, as someone who regularly now deals with local councils, academics, people in policy, they seem to see this as an abstraction. So I was in a forum giving advice to Adelaide City Council, who I should point out have actually supported Renew Adelaide quite a bit, so I shouldn't bitch about them too much. But they were asking us, so we think that young people, they make this life choice where they choose rental accommodation and casual work. We reckon that's a life choice. And it's sort of like you're watching, okay, the rise of the mortgage debt, the rise of HECS fees, the complete shattering of the workforce. That's all happened as I've grown up. These people haven't noticed. Unfortunately, a lot of those people are in positions of significant power, and they're making policy that directly impacts on people like me. So when Joel and I were setting these things up, and when the future generations of people involved in format have kind of gone through these things, those things all combine. So first off, you see the rise of globalisation. You see the traditional kind of New Deal approach to the social contract. So the way people used to buy into the society they lived in is they would get a mortgage and a full-time job, and now they own a portion of their society. There's this big social policy in the sort of 30s through the 50s and 60s. That's gone. The traditional way of buying into your society has been destroyed. On top of that, suburbanisation has meant that there is no public life. Employed a method of urban design that kills the chance for people to publicly engage with each other. Then in the 1990s, you have the internet come along, reinstigate that public life, rebind people together, but there's this point where governments have essentially opted out of public life. They've pursued urban planning policies and economic policies that mean that they no longer have an impact on culture as it functions like this. So whereas once you would have seen, you're at the market or the town centre and you'd see, okay, there's the town hall, there's a statue commemorating this thing, there's some physical presence of government and systems of governance in your life, that's totally gone. And now they're kind of a bit shocked and trying to figure it out. The issue being that for someone like me who's trying to set up infrastructure that supports that grassroots culture, the governance systems really struggle to figure it out. They don't want to fund participatory culture. If you go and say, I would like money to fund participatory culture, they really don't get it. They get very confused by the whole idea. The way they see culture functioning is like this. They want to employ a cultural professional, either to present their work to the audience as it drifts down, or to teach the sort of emerging or the young people how to become the top of the cultural pyramid. They've got a very select idea of what a cultural professional looks like. Very, very definite. They're particularly in specific forms of fine art. They don't look like Lachlan doing freeform dance down Rundle Mall. They don't look like Simon Loeffler sitting around playing with these various computers. They also have a very strong idea of the infrastructure those people need. So they don't want to fund me to have a building to get all these people who really we've got no idea who the hell they are to do whatever they want in. They want to fund something that fits this hierarchical model. And they get very upset if you try to get funding to do something else, because they think, so if I was, 24, 25, going to Adelaide City Council saying, give me a building so I can let all these lunatics do whatever they want to do, their idea, if we give you a building, people are going to do the mosh dancing and they're going to get really drunk and they're going to kill each other. We'll let you employ a cultural professional to moderate that, but if we let you do it, you'll go insane, because the basic idea governance works on is from things like 19th century gin lane. Actually, this is earlier than that. Their agency is kind of deliberately corrupt. When they're not moderated, they go insane. The problem is that culture now functioning like this is incredibly diverse. The things that are coming up now, there's no way we can spot what they are. There's no way you can develop an indicator that's going to say culture looks like this. This is how culture works. So at Format, which we've set up now as a permanent space, so Format started a series of one-day events, went to a two-day festival, went to a two-week festivals, and now has a permanent cultural hub on Peel Street in the city. The things that come through our venue, some of them do conform to traditional ideas of culture. You can kind of see emerging artists going up. They'll eventually exhibit at larger established galleries. Sometimes they look like this, but sometimes they look like this. Independent Press Fair, which is one of our first events, doesn't really fit anywhere else. Doesn't really fit a lot of funding categories, although youth literature things have sort of picked up on the whole zine indie press thing. Sometimes culture looks like this. Again, no idea how this would fit into any traditional systems. This is kind of a bit like the gin lane thing, though. Sometimes culture looks like bake sales. We've had bake sales in Format, which are a wonderful way of getting people from different backgrounds to come together and eat and drink lots of tea and argue with each other. And sometimes this is one of the people who came from Format who was from Spain. who came over and had gone through China, made a documentary on workplace relations laws in China and how they're not that great, and screened this in her house with networks she'd developed through formats. So because we'd all been in one space, we had the capacity to get multiple people to basically come to her house and watch this independent film she'd made. Now, again, regrettably, sometimes culture does look like this. But my point in making this speech is that we're dealing in an age that's post-information age, post-sort of economic rationalism and globalisation. The volume of activity, because of the information revolution, has shifted downwards. So anyone familiar with notions like the long tail, we've seen culture just shatter away from big market, easily moderated, to small scale, interactive, horizontally structured. My point here is that there's no way we can really figure out which sections of that culture to fund. It's not like we can say, oh, opera, let's give that heaps and heaps of money anymore. Where innovation is happening, where social cohesion happening is at that localised level, and we need to develop infrastructure to support that. And governments need to be involved in helping set it up so that it can be moderated in an accessible way, so it doesn't require people with white middle-class privilege like me to go out there and spend 5 years fighting with councils and state governments to set it up. So basically what we need to do, we need to look at ways that we support cultural activity primarily by giving them space to interact, making that space accessible, making it designed to bring people together. We need to accept that once those people are in those spaces, they're going to do all sorts of crazy shit that we can't figure out and we don't necessarily understand. And we just kind of need to let them get on with it. And that's my speech. Thanks.